From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. Ahead today, K-State's Dallas Peterson discusses post-emergence weed control for soybeans, saying that the window of opportunity for herbicide applications is closing quickly. Dallas will also address good stewardship of dicamba-tolerant soybeans, reminding you producers of the restrictions to follow with that system to prevent off-target drift. Today's Wheat Harvest Update features Extension Agricultural Agents Alicia Boer of Barton County, Zach Simon of Sedgwick County, and Kylie Harrison of Seward County. And later, with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. All that and more coming your way next on this Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Here we are into the latter part of June now, and the soybean crop in Kansas has been established for the most part in the state and hopefully is growing with the benefit of some rains around Kansas anyway. A quick assessment here of the weed control programs that you growers have employed and what you might look for from here in as far as suppressing weeds. Dallas Peterson with us once again, weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And you too, Dallas, are eyeing what's happening and thinking about the prospects of post-emergence treatment on soybeans too.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year, as they all are. It seems like they're all different. And this year we were so cold early in April, it seemed like, and we were way behind. And then it flipped, and obviously it became hot in May. And so everybody got going in the field and really planted beans, I'd say, earlier than normal for the most part. Now, there's still some late planted beans as well. But from a weed control standpoint, again, it's been interesting, and we haven't heard too much yet. It's been kind of quiet. The pre's have worked fairly good, and they are just essential anymore, that we use a good pre-emergence residual herbicide up front in that pre-plant, pre-emergence time frame. Because we don't have that easy button of Roundup anymore. When we had that and it worked, it was really easy, but we don't have that. So we have to use pre's, and we didn't get a lot of rain, but we got enough to activate a lot of those, it seems like. And then we didn't get a lot more rain to bring on more weeds, so they've worked pretty good. Post-emergence, we're kind of right in the middle of that season. Again, if you planted early, you're probably done with your post-emergence treatments, or you probably should be done with those post-emergence treatments because, again, timeliness is essential. Again, with Roundup, we could spray big weeds and get control. We can't do that with any other herbicides. We really got to try to target those herbicide applications when the weeds are less than 4 inches tall. And, again, there were some pretty good opportunities for spraying earlier, but this last week's been awful.
In terms of keeping product on target.
Yeah, the weeds are growing, and so that really is a challenge, and especially, again, with some of the different technologies that we have. We all know what happened last year with dicamba and the Extend soybeans, and things have been pretty quiet on that front so far as well. But this is about the time of the year last year when the reports started coming in. And again, the conditions here recently have not been very favorable for getting those applications on. And so even though it's tempting sometimes when the conditions are marginal to go out and spray, you just can't do it with those products in particular, because if you think it might be questionable, just don't do it. Yep. Just wait until the times are better to do it.
We might come back to the dicamba issue in just a second, but in as far as species, what weed challenges do you expect to be the most assertive this year?
Well, really, it's Palmer amaranth anymore. That seems like that is the weed du jour. across the whole state, except maybe eastern Kansas where it's still more water hemp and mare's tail perhaps. Of course, out west we also have kochia. But still, once we developed the glyphosate-resistant Palmer amaranth, it is so competitive, it grows so fast, it gets away from us, and so difficult to manage in that scenario. So that's really our driver weed in most fields is controlling that Palmer amaranth. And again, we have a lot of good pre-emergence herbicides for Palmer amaranth and water hemp control. They're not going to control it all. That's where, again, you can't wait then post-emergence. You have to get on there timely and maybe even use another residual in that post-emergence application, especially with the early season this year, to try to extend that control.
So what herbicide strategy will best suit post-emergence now, that Palmer amaranth issue?
Well, again, it all boils down to timing, and it doesn't matter if you're using dicamba or Liberty in a Liberty Link program or one of the other post-emergence herbicides like Cobra or Ultra Blazer or Prefix. Most of the labels suggest that it needs to be on before they exceed 4 inches tall. Really, you're better off if they're less than 2 to 3 inches tall, but when we get to 90 degrees, those things can grow 1 to 2 inches a day in some cases. And so, again, you have to be on top of it. And when it's windy like it's been the last week, that's really difficult.
Squeeze it in as you can is
right.
Basically the message there.
It really is, and a lot of them probably already need to have been done. And hopefully growers have been doing that. Again, we have actually moved to more reliance on the residual products. That's almost essential anymore. A couple of weeks ago, I drove up to Scandia, and along the way, I saw 2 or 3 fields that did not have any pre on them, and they were just loaded with weeds and already, 6 to 8 inches tall. That's kind of a recipe for disaster.
You brought it up, Dallas, the dicamba matter, and last year that became, to be honest, explosive as an issue, and not much has been said so far about dicamba usage and the dicamba-tolerant soybean technology. Any read on where that might go this year?
Well, again, the jury's still out, I think. Obviously, we had all the problems last year. We had the training requirements that we spent a lot of time on over the winter, and so we reviewed those things, a lot of new guidelines, new restrictions on the use of those products. They're restricted use products, and so you have to keep records. There's buffer requirements. Again, there's wind requirements. There's temperature inversion requirements, and so it does make it very difficult to get those applied how they should be applied. One thing, I guess, definitely you want to avoid if the wind is blowing in the direction of the susceptible crop, again, just do not spray. That's what the label reads, and that's what you should do. The other one that we really put a lot of focus on this winter is temperature inversions. We never really worried about them too much before. And again, I think it's not easy to know when you have a temperature inversion, but what we've learned as we've started measuring those is that they are fairly common this time of the year. They oftentimes start 1 to 2 hours before sunset, and they'll persist through the night and maybe last until about an hour after sunrise. And that's typically when the wind is calm, and you have a greater chance for an inversion when you have calm winds. Intuitively think, well, that's when we need to go spray because, we have less potential for wind drift, but we can actually have more drift of those fine particles with a temperature inversion, and it can cause more severe damage than we have when we have a modest wind. So, again, 3 to 10 mile an hour is the only wind at which you should apply those dicamba products. The window is just very narrow, and you just have to be on top of it.
And there are several layers of stewardship here, obviously mandated in many respects. So if one doesn't observe those pretty close to the letter, the future of this technology could well be in jeopardy, could it not?
It really is, and EPA last year said that if things don't improve from last year to this year, that they may not re-register those products. So they didn't really define what improvement is, but last year we know that we had way too many issues with non-target drift and movement of the herbicide, and as well as tank contamination. Again, hopefully we've learned our lesson a little bit. Again, the good news is we haven't heard of too many issues yet this year, But again, this is kind of the time of the season when that's likely to start showing up if it's going to happen.
Dallas, if one has questions about dicamba usage and in combination in particular with the Extend technology, is there a reservoir of information they can turn to?
Obviously, there was a lot of training that went on. The companies have websites that have all the restrictions on what can and can't be done. There are some differences actually from state to state. That information is available on their websites as well. You can only use certain tank mixes. You can only use certain spray tips. In some cases, you have to add another drift reduction agent to those applications. So all of that information is on the product websites. And so that's, I guess, where I would refer most folks to make sure that they're doing what needs to be done with those applications.
Be fully aware of the safeguards that have been built into the regulations there. But in closing, soybean growers, you are hitting a very pivotal time for finishing up your control program with Post-Emergence, and you don't have a great lot of latitude here, it sounds.
Yeah, it's interesting, and now we're really just getting into the double crop season,
right,
which adds another layer of complexity, if you will, with the timing and everything else. And if you are double cropping soybeans and planting Extend beans and planning to use dicamba, you need to be extra cautious because, again, that risk of having a problem is even greater in that scenario with the later applications.
As always, that good reference out of K-State Research and Extension is there for your usage, producers, the 2018 Chemical Weed Control Guide for Field Crops. You can inquire about that at your local extension office. Go online to the agronomy.ksu.edu website for an electronic version. Dallas, we appreciate it. Thanks for coming over.
Right. We look forward to the rest of the season, and hopefully it'll be a good one.
We hope so. That is Dallas Peterson, Weed Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, with thoughts for you soybean growers on your summertime weed management. What time is left for conducting that? You're listening to Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now. Time for another update on progress with the wheat harvest across Kansas. And once more, we're inviting in via phone several of our Extension, District, and County agricultural agents to share notes on how wheat harvest has progressed in their locations. And first off, this go-round, we'll hear about how things are moving along in Barton County. Alicia Boer is with us. She is the Extension agricultural agent there. And, Alicia, you've had plenty of open weather lately to see harvest through for a number of producers. How far along are they?
They're working hard and heavy as much as they can be in the field. I would say we are probably about half done. Some people are completely done, and other people, due to uneven ripeness in the fields, are having to wait for the portions of their fields to be able to be cut. They're just not ready yet.
Well, before we talk of yields and test weights, what were the thoughts on the wheat crop in Barton County going into the harvest? What were the general expectations, Alicia?
The general expectations, a lot of people were very worried, first of all, from the freeze that we encountered in April. Some fields looked like that they were going to have some freeze damage, but they were willing to kind of keep going just to see if the wheat would come out of it because wheat is very resilient. Our drought around here between the winter not getting any moisture and earlier this spring had held it back, and a lot of farmers were worried about the drought and whether they should just graze it out rather than going forward and harvesting it for grain. Mm-hmm. So I think most people were hoping for 20 to 30 bushels an acre. They knew the protein would be up, but there was a lot of talk of, just way lower yields than we've had the last couple of years.
And then as harvest has commenced, what have the yields and test weights looked like?
We're actually doing very well compared to what we were expecting. Test weights are ranging right around the 60 range. The areas I talked to, the low was 56 and the high is 62. Bushels an acre, we've gone anywhere from 20 to 80. The 80 is only a couple fields, but most of the time it's going right around between 25 to 40 is the average. Proteins, I've heard proteins are good, and they're going around the 12 to 13% range for protein right now.
So pleasantly surprised your farmers right now, it sounds.
Yes, especially with everything the wheat has went through this year, they were very pleased. The farmers that I've talked to, they've been very pleased about what the situation is.
But you hinted a moment ago, earlier on, producers were contemplating whether to take this crop to grain, at least some fields, or to utilize it otherwise. Did you see some acreage abandoned then?
I saw some acreage in a few sporadic fields where between wheat streak mosaic, drought, and the freeze that we had, they just decided to put cattle on it and use it more for the grazing possibilities than for the grain possibilities. It wasn't a lot of fields and not much of a percentage, but some people did just use it as grazing.
And any observations that you have, either from test plots or in general, about variety performance and particular varieties that are doing reasonably well in Barton County this year?
The one that I keep hearing is Zenda. Our test plots are actually, we have a research plot and we have a demonstration plot in Barton County, and both of them are not ripe yet, so we are not cutting them yet, so I can't tell you side by side. But Zenda is the variety I've heard from a couple of producers that it has done surprisingly well for this year.
And weather permitting, you would expect harvest to wrap up within a week or so?
Yes, I would say that if we don't get the amount of rain that is forecasted over the next couple days, we'll be done in a week. Otherwise, we'll just have to see how much rain we get and how long it takes to dry out the fields.
Right, which is customary every harvest in Kansas. So
yes, it is. When you get the combines out, the rain starts coming.
That's right. Alicia, thanks for the input, and we'll talk again later.
Thank you.
Alicia Boer there. She is the Extension Agricultural Agent in Barton County. That county part of the Cottonwood Extension District, comprised of Ellis and Barton counties. Now we turn our attention to a south central Kansas county and to find out how far harvest is along there. That would be Sedgwick County. The agricultural agent there, Zach Simon, joining us. Well, Zach, again, with the hot weather and dry weather of late, it's likely that your producers made some headway on harvest, did they not?
That's right, Eric. So far, they've had a pretty smooth harvest here. They're definitely on their downhill slope now, probably finishing up here within the next couple of days. So, mowing through it.
As you hear from producers on yields, test weights, and all of those standards, what's been the general report there?
Well, a little bit lower yields than last year. Of course, with the drought through the fall and early spring and late freeze in April and heat during filling period, it's had everything thrown at it. So what we're seeing for yields is probably upper 30s to lower 40s. And test weights have ranged from about 56 up to 61 and a half on the high end. But most probably falling in those high 50s.
And protein contents, have they been up there on the higher side, given that the yields were a little bit on the...
Yeah, protein's much better than last year. So stuff that I've heard that they have tested has all been 14% or better. Millers are happy to hear that. Hopefully we can maybe blend off some of the low protein wheat from last year.
Were these results about what you and others had anticipated for Sedgwick County?
Oh, I think during our wheat plot tours in May, that's kind of what I was guessing. our plots would make would be somewhere in that upper 30s range. So at that point, yes, I think some people have been pleasantly surprised with what they've seen. They were maybe expecting a little bit worse. But there are still a few fields out there that have been pretty disappointing.
Mm-hmm. Any observations you have, Zach, on variety performance? Any particular names that have seemingly done better than the others, at least from what you've seen or what you've heard from your growers?
I don't know that any varieties have really stood out from a yield standpoint. I know we harvested our plots last week and haven't gotten all the results analyzed, but not a great range of differences in yields there. I think it's going to definitely be a year, though, where we would see some of the varieties that have really good heat and drought tolerance shine, but not a whole lot of variation. So I don't know that there's one that has really stood out this year as a star.
Zach, we appreciate the comments. We'll talk again soon. Many thanks to you.
All right, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
And that on Sedgwick County Harvest Progress, Zach Simon, Extension Agricultural Agent there. To cap off today's wheat harvest update, we go now to far southwest Kansas in Seward County, the liberal area. Kylie Harrison is the Extension Agricultural Agent there in Seward County. So going into this harvest in the southwest, it was concerning as to just what kind of wheat would be produced this year because of all the adverse conditions, the dryness being primary among them. What were your thoughts, Kylie, as wheat harvest commenced in that area?
Well, I guess going into it, we didn't have the highest of expectations, of course, because, like you said, just real tough conditions this year. But really, I think most guys have been somewhat pleasantly surprised, better than what they thought as far as yields have been going.
So attach some numbers to that. What yields and test weights are you hearing from your growers?
Yields, dry land, of course, kind of all over the board, anywhere from clear down to 6, which obviously isn't great. But then on the upper end, 42, and I even heard one field making 50, and then irrigated somewhere between that 30 and 50 range. Test weights have been running 56 to 61 are the numbers I've been getting in.
Now, we need to note this is the wheat that did make it to cutting. In fact, there was likely quite a bit of acreage that was abandoned in your area, wasn't it?
Correct. Yes, there was. And due to reasons all across the board, we had some hail, obviously droughts, things like that.
Right. But again, the yields might have been a touch better than most had anticipated going in, those fields that were harvested. Were there any particular harvest challenges? There's been talk about short-statured wheat. Was that an issue in your area?
Yes, definitely. It's very short, so that causes a wide array of problems there. And then I've also heard from another farmer that they were experiencing some headworms once they were harvesting, but they said they're not bad enough to have any discounts taken at the elevator at this time.
Are there any varieties that you're hearing about or seeing in field that seem to have weathered these adverse conditions a little better and are performing a little better?
You know, I haven't really heard anything specific. The couple guys that I spoke with said that of everything they planted, it was all turning out about the same. How
close are your producers to being done? And in fact, you had quite a rainfall overnight, which will slow harvest.
We are actually about 3/4 of the way done. That's really great for our guys. And of course, that rain last night is going to slow things down a little bit. Prior to that rain, they were thinking that they should probably be done within the week, but of course this rain is going to slow us down a little bit.
But you say upwards of an inch or better in that Seward County area, so you'll take it, right?
Right, definitely. We're not complaining. It's nice to see some puddles in the yard.
Kylie, thanks for the quick comments right here.
No problem. Thank you.
She's Kylie Harrison, the Extension Agricultural Agent in Seward County, southwest Kansas. And that is today's Wheat Harvest Report here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Once more, glad to have you along. Eric Atkinson here. Now, today's agricultural news headlines in brief, courtesy in part of DTN. A top trade advisor to President Trump said that the administration is working on measures to protect agriculture and other critical industries from retaliatory tariffs being threatened by China amid the escalating trade dispute between the two countries. Peter Navarro told reporters yesterday that Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue and others in the administration are taking into account the potential impact of retaliatory tariffs on those industries and are making provisions. The administration, he said, is working on measures that will have the backs of farmers, as he put it. Navarro said, quoting again, "I can assure you we are not unprepared." Now, on Monday, the president did escalate the trade conflict with China, asking his administration to identify a new list of $200 billion in Chinese goods that would be penalized with tariffs. The move followed tariffs applied last week on $50 billion in Chinese imports to the U.S., designed to punish China over allegations of unfair trade practices. Beijing immediately threatened to retaliate with its own equivalent tariffs on U.S. goods, vowing to target industries critical to the U.S. economy. Navarro said that the president is willing to continue negotiations with China as he seeks to find a solution that will ultimately correct the trade imbalance, as he called it. Navarro added, however, that talk is cheap, and the administration is now looking for China to show its goodwill through actions. In a statement late Monday, the president said that he has an excellent working relationship with President Xi, and, quoting, "We will continue working together on many issues, but the United States will no longer be taken advantage of on trade by China and other countries in the world." The words of the president. Now, one university agricultural economist says that the Chinese tariffs on U.S. soybeans would have little short-term impact on U.S. exports. Here's a look at that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
If China actually imposes that 25% tariff on U.S. soybeans right now, what would be the impact on U.S. producers over the next 3 or 4 months?
Minimal.
Almost nothing. Purdue University professor Wally Tyner, he and his colleagues have done a study on the impacts under various scenarios, and he said there would be no impact of the Chinese tariffs for almost a year, and here's why.
They buy their soybeans from us after our harvest in the fall through spring, and then they buy from Brazil after the Brazil harvest in the spring until fall. And so they're going to be buying Brazilian soybeans anyway between now and fall.
And he says there would be a very small effect even well into 2019.
Because Brazil wouldn't have time to react and increase their supplies enough.
But if tariffs stick around for over 2 years, major impacts on the U.S. The problem now is that just the talk about tariffs has affected the market. On Monday, soybean futures dropping to one-year lows.
Psychologically, markets overreact. You've seen it over and over again, but they'll come back.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
The Information Service Roll Call is reporting this week that if everything goes according to plan this month, House leaders will round up the necessary Republican votes to pass a 2018 Farm Bill, following the unexpected defeat on the floor that put that legislation on hold. However, it's too early to tell if the road ahead will be smooth or rocky for the House and Senate Agriculture Committees in negotiating a final compromise bill, Roll Call says. This year, the House fight over the GOP effort to restructure the SNAP program has overshadowed other potential disputes that are possibly emerging, including whether or not large farm operations or extended family members on farms should get government subsidies. An Ohio State University agricultural economist, Carl Zuloff, who has been tracking farm bills since 1981, said it's likely there will be an extension of the current legislation of some kind before there's a new bill. In terms of an extension versus a new bill, by September the 30th, it's probably 50-50, in Zuloff's words. Quoting again, he says, "I think you will have major differences between the House and Senate beyond SNAP. If negotiations stall and the rest of Congress gets caught up in the election year calendar, an extension could last for 1 to possibly 2 years," says Zuloff. The contentious STAP provisions in the House bill are not part of the Senate version. Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman Pat Roberts of Kansas said many Senate Democrats oppose the House bill, expanding food stamp work mandates that able-bodied adults must meet to keep food benefits, and its tighter eligibility rules and requirements. Also changes in monthly benefit calculations and the shift of billions of dollars from food benefits into state bureaucracies. Well, one of the most competitive fed cattle shows in the country was held earlier this month in Garden City. And Todd Domer has the cattle and carcass results from Beef Empire Days.
A steer fed at Lane County Feeders of Dighton by Foot Cattle Company won the Earl C. Brookover Memorial Award at the Beef Empire Days Fed Cattle Show. The 1,506-pound black steer placed fourth among live steers and seventh in the steer carcass contest for the best combined finish in the show. Carcass data showed the steer graded middle choice and was a yield grade 2.87. The grand champion heifer was a 1,344-pound entry fed at Next Gen Cattle Feeding by Schmidt Land and Cattle. This heifer placed sixth live and seventh in the heifer carcass contest. The entry graded high choice and was a yield grade 2.98. Lane County also fed the steer chosen as the grand champion carcass. The 1,562-pound steer owned by Foot Cattle Company graded low prime and was a yield grade 3.38. The champion heifer carcass was produced by a 1,260-pound entry fed at Danner Feeders of Muscatine, Iowa by Myron Danner. Also placing 14th live, this heifer graded low prime and was a yield grade 2.61. A total of 76 steers and 53 heifers competed in the show. Overall, the steers graded 14% prime, 74% choice, and 10% select. The steers were 2.6% yield grade 1s, 13.2% yield grade 2s, 48.7% yield grade 3s, and 35.5% yield grade 4s and 5s. Of the heifers, 13% graded prime, 74% were choice, and 11% graded select. The heifers were 3.8% yield grade 1s, 28.3% yield grade 2s, 28.9% yield grade 3s, and 17.1% yield grade 4s and 5s. I'm Todd Domer.
Today's agricultural news headlines there. This quick reminder to listen to the podcast version of this broadcast. Go to agtoday.net or using your podcast app on your mobile device, type in Agriculture Today Kansas. You'll find the program and find the path to subscribing to the podcast. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
Being a partly sunny spot and the fact that deer walk by, I selected 3 yarrow plants to fill that pot. A gift from nature.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
There are not many large containers left in my outdoor kitchen to choose from or to fill up. However, I had one more idea. As a matter of fact, I've more than one idea left, but one has to draw the line. Enough is enough. Just as a sideline, I did use an old tree stump I cut off 12 inches above the ground. That stump was hollow, and with the crowbar and pointed spade I chipped out more softwood to enlarge the hole. When I was satisfied, I cleaned the chips out and added some fertilizer to help with decomposing of the remaining sawdust. Then I brought some good soil with the wheelbarrow and filled the hole. Being a partly sunny spot and the fact that deer walk by, I selected 3 yarrow plants to fill that pot, a gift from nature. The 3 are crowded, and I could not follow planting instructions as far as suggested distance to plant. But in a planter, I like plants crowded. A filled pot or container looks much better than a half-empty container. The thing is, in a container, I can take good care of plants. I must, because I have to water. And as I water daily when it is dry, sometimes twice a day, I see how the plant is doing. But the one more thing I wanted to try is to grow gladioli. Other years when I planted them in the border, I did not get much of a bloom. It simply was too hot. I gave them water, but it was a no-show. Now I like to try to grow them once more and have a colorful display, but in a container this time. To keep them standing up, I will place a cut-down tomato trellis in the container, and that should work. On my drive to the nursery, I noticed the blue-gray color of the recently mowed lawns. It was hot and dry. On the far horizon stood large white cumulus clouds, maybe a thunderstorm someday. At the nursery, I briefly talked with the owner. I've known him as a student, and he worked in the Netherlands for a while with a mutual friend, a bulb grower. He was busy hauling potted plants to the front display area. We briefly talked about plants, how dry and hot it was already this spring. Not very promising. However, serious gardeners know that we're in Kansas, and they know that we are in Manhattan, Kansas here. And even though Manhattan, Kansas is not as good as Kansas City or Leavenworth, it's better than Colby and Goodland. It all has to do with the annual rainfall. We get less than Kansas City, but more than Goodland. Like the old nurseryman said, we are trying to grow plants, trees and shrubs and flowers on the prairie, so we better keep that in mind. When we buy flowers, remember that I've thought about concentrating on spring blooming flowers and to skip the hot, dry summer, and then get enthused again with the fall blooming plants. However, by going for containers, I hope to be able to bridge the gap. In fact, that I can move containers around with a dolly if I must. Does help to avoid the excess heat. Part shade does help. Of course, the watering remains the same. An important factor in gardening success is having good soil. If you have poor soil, spend money to improve it. Just think what farmers have learned to do. Improve their cropland. Get organic matter into the ground. Grow cover crops for a few years and work the crop into the ground. Use organic mulches. I know it takes time, energy and money, but it is a good start. Then select adapted plant material. The choice may surprise you. Of course, buy quality plants with a healthy root system. The root system is all the plant has to get established. A good plant is not cheap. Once planted, take care of it. You have to pay special attention to newly planted plants, at least for the first year. And don't think that when fall comes, the work is done. Our dry and windy winter can kill plant material. Good soils where roots can get well established and protective mulching gives plants the chance to succeed. Don't let all of this scare you, though. Just think about the reward, the color, the scent, the butterflies and the bees. I'm enjoying it, and so is my wife. As I said earlier, I'm concentrating on containers to make the care easier. I know in a container roots can only go so deep unless they grow out through the drainage hole, and get a larger pot. On our prairie, we have native plants with roots which go 5, 8, 10 feet deep in search for water. No wonder they look glorious on a hot day. But remember, those with gray leaves have an advantage. And what about the compass plant? In the ground, plants cannot move. They must defend themselves. Back to the gladioli. When I lived east, we grew 80 acres of gladiola for corms. Now, having cared for 80 acres, I should be able to grow at least one container, a large container. The selection of corms, not bulbs, by the way, was not that big. They were supplied by a Dutch wholesaler and friend to the local nursery. My container with 30 corms is a sentimental journey. I wonder if there are any Sunny Boys among them. An old favorite.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. Our time's away for today. We appreciate you tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.